खंजरबद्ध लगा पाएंगे, कनक तीलियों से टकराकर पुलकित पंख टूट जाएंगे। स्वर्ण श्रृंखला के बंधन में अपनी गति उड़ान सब भूले, बस सपनों में देख रहे हैं तरु की फुगनी पर के झूले। These lines of Padmashri माननीय श्री शिव मंगल सिंह सुमन reminds us the value of freedom. आजादी जो अमूल्य है, वह हर किसी को प्यारी है और यह हर एक जीव का मूल अधिकार है। नमस्कार and good evening to all. I, Dr. Richa Sharma, welcomes you all to the first lecture of ICSSR Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav series. As a part of the celebration of the 75th year of India's independence, ICSSR is initiating a series of lectures to review the achievements of India and the prospects for the future in various fields of social, economics, scientific, technological endeavor by the leaders in their respective fields. ICSSR is feeling honored in welcoming a very august gathering of academic luminaries, which includes highly acknowledged scientists, social scientists, bureaucrats, and senior diplomats of foreign embassies in India. To begin the program formally, may I invite Professor VijayRaghavan ji, Dr. J.K. Bajaj sir, the chairman ICSSR, to come on the dais, please. I would like to request you all to give warm welcome. Now, I would like to request our chairman, Dr. J.K. Bajaj, to welcome our chief guest of today's function, Professor VijayRaghavan ji, with bouquet of flowers.
Thank you very much.
To begin our program, it's my pleasure to invite Professor V.K. Malhotra sir, Member Secretary ICSSR, to give welcome address and brief introduction of ICSSR. Sir.
Thank you, Richa. Very learned Professor K. VijayRaghavan ji and Dr. J.K. Bajaj, Chairman, Indian Council of Social Science Research. I could see in the gathering Professor J.S. Rajput, also Professor Murli Manohar Joshi, and there are a number of academic luminaries. I'm thankful to the foreign collaborators of Indian Council of Social Science Research. There are many collaborators I could see here. And a word about Indian Council of Social Science Research. ICSSR was established in 1969 by the Government of India to promote and fund social science research in the country. It is the apex social science research body funded by the Ministry of Education, Government of India. ICSSR provides policy advice on all matters pertaining to social science research in the country through collaborative arrangements with foreign agencies, and also reviews progress of social science research in the country. ICSSR has done various international collaboration with parallel major funding agencies working in the area of social science and humanities research. ICSSR's sponsored studies have considerable presence in various policy documents of the ministries, discussions, and also in reports of important think tanks, agencies, and databases. We have conducted 6 rounds of surveys of current status of research in key social science disciplines such as economics, political science, sociology, geography, education, anthropology, etc. in the country. ICSSR promotes social science research in various priority areas through its various fellowships, projects, and other schemes such as doctoral, postdoctoral, senior, and national fellowship for scholars and faculties at various levels. Funding for national, international, and collaborative seminars, training and capacity building programs for the researchers and young faculties. ICSSR also supports publication of journals and books through its publication and maintenance grant scheme. In addition, ICSSR's National Documentation Center, NASDOC, provides library, documentation, data, and online services for social science research scholars. We have a pan-India presence through our 24 research institutes and 6 regional centers. In 2018, Ministry of Education, erstwhile Ministry of Human Resource Development, entrusted ICSSR to implement its flagship research scheme, Impactful Policy Research in Social Sciences, IMPRESS in Social Sciences and related policy domains. So, the primary responsibility of promoting social science research and related policy research fell on ICSSR. As far as some of the recent achievements and outputs from ICSSR are concerned, in very brief science domain. Moreover, India's rank in social science publications as captured by Scopus has improved from 11th in 2015 to 5th in 2021 in the world, with one of the best growth rates. India's share in world publication has seen a rise from 10,500 to nearly 1.8% of the total world publications in 2015 to 32,000, which is 4.4% of the global publications in social science domain. In open access publications in social science for the period 2011 to 2020, ICSSR has an H index of 34, which is comparable with IIT Kharagpur and Delhi, and one of the best among the institutions doing or promoting social science research in India. India's share in social science research continues to be in the range of 75 to 80% of all SAARC countries. According to UKRI report, ICSSR has tremendously enhanced its footprints internationally in terms of impactful collaborative researches at international level. It is mentioned in their September 2021 report, where ICSSR has been shown to have a significant footprint and found to be a lead collaborator along with DST, DPT, and DA. Under ACOM, we have conducted nearly 97 seminars and lectures so far, and shortly we will be completing a ton. We have a strong network with major international funding agencies at bilateral and multilateral levels. We have strong collaboration with agencies like UN, UNESCO, European Union, ICCO, and other multilateral agencies. ICSSR's contribution in developing research roadmap for COVID-19 recovery has been well acknowledged by the UN General Assembly. A few words about Professor VijayRaghavan. Professor VijayRaghavan is an emeritus professor and former director of National Center for Biological Sciences. On 26 March 2018, he was appointed as the Secretary Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, and later as Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. Professor Raghavan graduated with a Bachelor of Technology degree in Chemical Engineering from IIT Kanpur in 1975 and Masters in 1977. He completed his doctoral research in 1983 in the field of molecular biology from Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. During his postdoctoral work from 1984 to 85, he was a research fellow, and then from 86 to 88, a senior research fellow at California Institute of Technology. As far as groundbreaking work is concerned, he spearheaded groundbreaking research to understand the important principles and mechanisms that control the nervous system and muscles during development, and how these neuromuscular systems direct specific locomotor behaviors. His awards and achievements include, in 1997, he was elected Fellow of Indian Academy of Sciences. In 1998, Bhatnagar Prize. He bagged Bhatnagar Prize for Science and Technology, awarded by Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. In 2003, he received the Distinguished Alumnus Award of IIT Kanpur. In 2006, he was awarded the J.C. Bose Fellowship. In 2010, he was elected Fellow of TWAS, the Academy of Sciences for Developing World. In 2012, he received H.K. Ferodia Award for his original contribution to the field of life sciences, particularly to developmental biology, genetics, and neurogenetics. In the same year, he became Fellow of Royal Society. In 2013, he was conferred the Padma Shri by the President of India. In April 2014, he was elected as a Foreign Associate of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. on this occasion to deliberate on 75 years of science in India and the prospects for the next decade. We find none better than him on this occasion.
वो जो उधर लोग बैठे हैं, आप इधर आ जाओ, थोड़ा कॉम्पैक्ट होगा और वो खाली करके इधर आ जाए. You are saying something?
Thank you, sir, for providing wonderful insight on ICSSR and its contribution and introductory remarks of our chief guest. Now, may I request Dr. J.K. Bajaj, Chairman ICSSR, to give his introductory remarks and enlighten all of us with his great wisdom and profound knowledge.
I think the formalities are done and we will request Professor VijayRaghavan to begin his speech. Later I will give my wisdom.
Good evening, everybody. Namaskar. Dr. Murli Manoj Joshi ji, Dr. Bajaj, and all the eminent colleagues from here and from all our embassy friends. It's a great honor to be here. The danger in being asked to give a talk well in advance of the date is that there are two dangers. One, you readily accept, and then you actually think that you can deliver on what is asked to be delivered. As the date nears, you realize that you have taken on a task far beyond your capabilities, and then it becomes extremely challenging. So I approach this talk with much trepidation. Now, let me begin by telling you what I will talk about and what I will not talk about. The topic is about 75 years of science in India and the prospect for the next decade. But to talk about how science in India has grown over the last 75 years, it is important for us to appreciate two important parameters. One, what is it that happened before that, not just in India but all over the world before independence? And therefore, when you have as a start time as 1947, what is the background under which that took place? And then we ask, in that situation, how did India take various steps? What can we learn from those? And then going forward now, Dr. Bajaj asked me to talk about what's there for the next decade. It would be far easier if you had said what happens in the next 75 years. So then you have the great luxury of saying things for which you don't have to be very precise. But now you have the challenge of predicting what's going to happen in the near future, and that's going to be very, very difficult or impossible. Because the world is changing very rapidly. Now, let me address this first part of the time before 1947. And I'll give you a sense of perspective by going far back in time. If you start from where I am standing and take close to 14 small steps, and each step, if you say, is 1 billion years, then 13.5 billion years or so ago, the universe started, right? There are many questions and theories about that, but that's one viewpoint about the Big Bang and 13.5 billion years ago. That's 14 steps away from here. 4.6 billion years, so for a long time nothing happened in terms of life. 4.6, close to 5 steps from here, is when life on Earth started, right? So 4.6 billion years ago. Then about close to 4 billion years ago, single cell organisms came about, as opposed to other forms of life. Then about 3 billion years ago, 3 steps from me, imagine 14 steps is there and only 3 steps from me, is when photosynthesis, the ability to use light to create energy, started. 2 billion years ago, just 2 steps away,
complex single cellular organisms came about, just over there. And 1 billion years ago, these single cell organisms evolved into multicellular organisms. So that's 1 billion years ago. Then 600 million years ago, I'm barely moving, is when you had the ancestors of simple animals coming out. Then about 500 million years ago, the ancestors of insects and spiders, arachnids came about. Then about 500 million years ago, fish and amphibians came, and so on. And sometime around 200 million years ago, very close by, mammals started coming. And this complex world of mammals and dinosaurs and insects, and later on, and before that, just before that, flowering plants, was a very different world from what it is now. There were no humans at that time. Around 65 million years ago, something extraordinary happened. An asteroid hit the Earth, and it's thought to have hit the Earth somewhere near Mexico, and that completely changed the climate of the planet. Huge amounts of dust and darkening and suffocation took place, and all the big animals were completely eliminated. This allowed the small mammals which managed to survive that to start dominating Earth. So 65 million years onwards, we had the growth of the mammalian radiation. Much later, sometime around 2.5 million years ago, very recently, and I'm not even moving on that scale, the ancestors of humans, hominins of various kinds, came about 2.5 million years ago. And it is only about 200,000 years ago that humans as we know came into being, and Neanderthals, who are our direct cousins, they were lost only about 25,000 years ago. Now what happened in this period of 10, 25, 35,000 years which has changed the planet in this dramatic manner? And that change has come about largely because of us humans. So throughout this history of life on Earth, all life, right from unicellular organisms to the most complex ones and humans, they sort of aim, as it were, if you can put an aim, that's perhaps not the right word, was to survive. Somehow use the manipulation of nature to manage to survive and do it in creative ways. But during human evolution, something very interesting happened. A few very interesting things happened. First, during evolution, the ability to oppose thumb and forefinger happened. So this means you could grab objects, manipulate them, shape tools, and create various kinds of machines, as it were, simple tools from stone and so on. This no other animal can do with this dexterity. The second was the change in our vocal cords to make various kinds of sounds, linked to the capacity to analyze those sounds and feed back into new sounds. The ability to process speech came about. Now that required both changes in our vocal cords, and simultaneously the third thing was changes in our brain. Humans, compared to other non-human primates like gorillas, chimpanzees and so on, have a much larger number of nerve cells for our body mass compared to those other relatives of ours. This came about because those relatives have to constantly be eating to feed, to get the energy required for that large body size. We too would have been trapped there. But so there's one hypothesis, is that we learned how to use fire, and in doing so could pack greater nutrition, cook food, and pack it into a food. This allowed the energy needed to grow the nervous system. Now the use of tools, the use of language, and the use of communication in multiple ways is the history of humans on this earth, as I should show. And this completely transformed humans and their place in Earth. So early civilizations, either farming communities or hunting communities or early cities which they built, they could get organized and do things. But soon in every location, because of the organization and the consumption of natural resources, in many places where it was intensive, they started running out of natural resources. Other places could use those resources in a more sustainable manner, and they didn't run out. So when they started running out of natural resources, for example, when the soil was used by aggressive agriculture, many farmers, particularly in Western countries, where such aggressive use were started to grow already, discovered the value of bird droppings, guano, as fertilizers. And soon they started running out of those fertilizers. Those came from huge mountain cliffs where bird droppings were present in South America or China. Ships used to bring them, import them, and use them. Then nitrite mines, again from China and from South America, were used to make fertilizer for growth of agriculture in the West. But that too started running out. Early in the 20th century, there was a major change in which two German scientists, Haber and Bosch, invented the Haber-Bosch process to make ammonia by capturing nitrogen from the atmosphere and making ammonia, and thereby ammonical fertilizers. It also led, sadly, to the growth of the chemical warfare industry as a side, or some would say main project separately. But the availability of ammonical fertilizers completely transformed agriculture and broke what many call the Malthusian limit of sustainable growth. That is, people thought that they could exploit nature in this manner indefinitely and continue have unlimited, unrestrained growth because of scientific ingenuity will always find a way out of limitations. That was the view which many took. Today, half the nitrogen in each of our bodies comes from the Haber-Bosch process, effectively from intensive agriculture. So that's something to keep in mind. But this kind of development in this very short window has completely changed the world in every area. Today, instead of being mere survivors in the course of evolution, many philosophers have pointed out that humans today wield the paintbrush on the canvas of the earth and the future of the planet out of every hardship by some ingenuity or the other. If we run out of copper, we will use fiber. If we run out of something, we'll find some other way, and so on and so forth, is clearly running out for the simple reason that the consequences of this unbridled growth has had two major kinds of problems. On the planetary level, it has resulted in the consequences which we see of climate change, global warming, extreme weather conditions, and so on. Also loss of biodiversity and loss of sustainable development. And it has also resulted in the extreme wealth of some communities and the extreme impoverishment of others. Culturally, over the last 250 years or so, it has also created a big cultural divide about attitudes. We look upon solutions to problems in a blinkered, unitary manner and not as a composite global manner, right? And therefore, solutions are constantly given in terms of new technology which will solve everything, and not an integrated view of technology into cultural context, into social context, into what is feasible, while keeping in mind aspirations and sustainable development. So it's not that the poor have modest aspirations. They do have high aspirations, but we should have aspirations for all in a manner which is sustainable. This was articulated very recently by a former Nigerian vice president in an article where he asked about what the future of energy is going to be in the world, particularly in Africa. And he pointed out that there are major demands on the countries of Africa, as also the countries of Asia and South America, to curtail their greenhouse gas emissions, to curtail the use of fossil fuels, because the planet is a threat. And everyone agrees that the planet is a threat. But he said, look, our challenge is another one, simultaneously. We have to lift billions out of poverty, and they have their aspirations. And if I go, and this is my point, if I go outside and ask a poor person what their top 10 lists of problems are, climate change is going to be number 100. The top 10 is about getting a job, going to school, health, family, education, everything. Dealing with the heat, can I have a fan, or air conditioner is far away, and so transport and so on. So how do you get these benefits, which many, the rich here and in the West would call luxuries? How do you get it to everyone at a stage when energy has to be carefully done? But this raises a fundamental cultural, scientific problem right from the start of the Industrial Revolution. And this was a problem which Gandhiji saw in 1931 when he went to Liverpool and Manchester and tried to explain to the workers there about why he was asking for a boycott of British goods. Right? There was a big puzzle there. The workers were very upset because their livelihood was being affected by this boycott, and they were poor workers. So he went to explain this. And there's a beautiful photograph of Gandhiji in Manchester with the families of workers there. The point which Gandhiji made, and I paraphrase, is the following. If in any system you want to have order and not disorder and high standards of living and no pollution and so on, then you cannot do it if the system is completely closed. You cannot get from the system and use it in the system and have order. You will only slowly get increasing disorder. If you want to have complete order, then you must be connected to the outside from where you extract something, energy, and use it for order here. Now that energy in the Industrial Revolution, at the start of the Industrial Revolution, was the engine, therefore using ore and oil and so on for running the engines, the spinning jenny, technology which allows manufacturing, and that too required the use of workers and others outside the system. And the third was a telegraph which allowed communication so that you could communicate to markets and everywhere else and sell it. These three are metaphors for the continuing growth of the Industrial Revolution, post-Industrial Revolution economies. And this was a complete exponential rise, very different from the sedate rate of growth of previous periods. At earlier stages, you had, pre-independence India, historically a lot of wisdom and science and technology was used in very different ways, astronomy, medicine, metallurgy and so on. There was, extraordinary science in that period, but it didn't scale up in this, rapid, extractive manner which the Industrial Revolution did. It happened again. These kinds of changes took place in China, in the Middle East and so on. But the scale and momentum of the Industrial Revolution was driven not by some technological invention alone, but a philosophy that said that now we can scale up markets and growth and order within a system by an extractive mechanism. Now that extractive mechanism works, and it worked for 200 years as long as you have extracting from the places around. Today's world order is very different. Today, everyone wants sustainable growth, or everyone wants growth. There is no one else you can extract. Everyone wants no damage to the environment. You cannot do something and damage the environment, or at least should not. And everyone wants, greenhouse gas emissions to come. So how can you, if the entire world is a closed system, and you have very rigorous rules about what you cannot do in the entire world, if you say that I cannot exploit African mines to get my minerals, I have to be fair and sustainable and environmental friendly, how on earth are you going to get development which requires energy, as the Nigerian Vice President said? So this is the biggest challenge. It's a challenge sort of in thermodynamics, as it were, where you cannot get anything for free, and whatever you do has a cost. So this is a challenge which India needs to face, all big countries need to face going forward. Now in this context, how did our science and technology develop? In many ways, it mirrors the changes during the Industrial Revolution and afterwards. The first, I will not go into science in the pre-British period, there are experts here far better than I am, with a deeper understanding. Dr. Murli Manoj Joshi, Dr. Bajaj, and Dr. Bajaj has done great work on Dharanpalji's work on looking at more recent wisdom in agriculture and labor and so on and so forth, and how that impacts on how sustainable societies can be. And those are areas, in which are far outside my expertise. But around the time, a little before independence, in the early years of the 20th century, when the presidencies of Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta were established, the principal purpose of education systems at that time were to provide and train people for the management of the empire. There were other institutions also started, medical colleges notably, but other colleges started by philanthropists, well-to-do Indians who wanted to develop the community. Those were relatively modest. But the presidencies, just these three of them, and some exemplary colleges were examples of teaching which took place, substantially of a high standard. There were also universities established, Allahabad, Agra, these are examples of older universities, Bombay universities later. So these places became places of training. Now there were, in such situations, in a small world, by small I mean the world is geographically the same size, but a small number of people involved in intellectual activities, where communication was actually rather rapid. You wrote a letter, it went out, 14 days it took to reach, 14 days to come back, and if you wrote every day, you got a reply every day. So it wasn't that bad. People in intellectual areas, whether it was Tagore or J.C. Bose, could communicate with people all over the world, and they did. And the number of people of highest quality, both in India and abroad, in these areas were relatively modest. Now this resulted in some people, some individuals, and Jagdish Chandra Bose is one example, who was inspired to be very creative and independent in a manner which is unusual. So his work was absolutely fantastic. He went briefly to the UK and came back. He had a big challenge in establishing his research at Presidency College. The principal told him that he cannot get funds for his research, very modest funds, so he used his own funds. And then he eventually started the Bose Institute and made a very important remark there. He said that, look, any task, however difficult and however complicated, is solvable if firstly you start working on it and stop talking too much about what you need to be done, how difficult it is. Get on with the task. And secondly, do it with diligence. Then you can solve any problem. And the Bose Institute was a similar one to set up. But people such as C.V. Raman, who later on set up the Raman Institute, and much later Bhabha, who set up, Homi Bhabha, who set up the Tata Institute for Fundamental Research, the Maharaja of Mysore, working with Swami Vivekananda, setting up the Indian Institute of Science, started the period of institutional growth in a near independence and post-independence period. The British also set up structures like the Indian Council for Agricultural Research, the CSIR, and these kinds of big structures were again, very important. They catered to a very small fraction of our population, and that's exemplified when you see that there is, one Camel Research Institute, one chemical lab, one Buffalo Research Institute, one, electrochemical research institute, one of each kind for the entire country. And so again, it catered to a very small number of people and small industrial sector which is there. So India then, post-independence, moved from a period of extraordinarily talented people who excelled to global standards in a relatively small scientific world to a changed world post-Second World War, where there was enormous growth of institutions in science all over the world. This completely changed the face of competitiveness used in the approach we had taken to addressing science. And the approach was a global, Western-dominated approach. Now look at the contrast between what was there pre-independence and what happened post-independence in scientific institutions. This dramatic growth of science institutions all over the world. Whenever Bush in the US was spurring science as the new frontier and developing science investment in an extraordinary way. Germany reviving, Japan reviving, the UK investing in science and technology. All this changed from a situation where pre-Second World War, if that is the wall of excellence, if that's where the really top people are. The top people, individuals in science, arose pre-institution time as random, excellent people driven by their own genius. And they could arise from anywhere in the world. They arose at a higher frequency in the West in terms of Western science. But they arose in India too. You have Bose and you have Ramanujan earlier, you have Satyan Bose and so on and so forth, C.V. Raman and everyone. So, in a low frequency situation, the possibility of individual excellence being close to the maximum wall was relatively high because it was a lottery of talented individuals. Science too was a much more open frontier at that time where intelligent people could make extraordinary advances. Post-institutionalization of science, two things happened. All the low-hanging fruit were hit very rapidly in terms of excellence and advancement by the big institutions of the West. Our institutions, however big they were, the atomic energy establishment, space, science and technology, biotechnology much later, and so on and so forth, are a minuscule fraction of that enormous vehicle which was rumbling along. Therefore, the wall of excellence today, both individuals and institutions, is populated very heavily. In the West today, for everyone who gets a Nobel Prize, there are about 50 people who should have got that prize, right? So earlier on, you used to argue about whether 1 or 2 or 3 people should have got something. But today the numbers are very large. So that kind of individual recognition-driven science is no longer tenable in the West, and less so now, and less so in India. There are no shortage of top quality people in India, but the huge mass of that effort in the West shadows them, and we sometimes deprecate ourselves saying, oh, where are those, Boses and Einstein, Sahas and so on and so forth. They're there, but there are many more of such people in the West given the competitive. So this is a way of saying that the approach we have taken to science since 1947, which has had many kinds of features which we must be proud of, is fraught with one fundamental issue, or two I should say. One, it can in theory, more of this can never catch up. And in practice, it can never address the problems, both intellectual and practical, of a country this size. So what do we need, in addition to having such quality approaches to science, to do that is the question. Now, the answer to that, I'll start winding down here, comes from examining what we have done in our scientific structures, both to our research institutions and to our universities. As I said, not only did the university system, first the presidency colleges and then other places, produce people of extraordinary high quality, the colleges themselves, post-independence, for some time, were really fantastic places for research. There's no question about it. Pre-Second World War and just after independence, Allahabad University was absolutely stunning. Aligarh Muslim University was absolutely fantastic. The Vice Chancellor Syed Ahmad Khan had got Andre Weil, one of the world's greatest mathematicians, to come to work in Aligarh. And they had a quarrel, and Andre Weil had to leave. Andre Weil was working with the head of department at that time, a namesake of mine and no relative. His name was VijayRaghavan. He was later called Dhaka VijayRaghavan. And Dhaka VijayRaghavan went to Dhaka and developed the mathematics department. The Delhi University Plant Sciences department was developed by Panchanan Maheshwari, who came from Dhaka and he came to Delhi. So the university system was flourishing in many ways, and by individuals who were driven with a sense of purpose. Now the growth of the research institutional structure need not have happened at the cost of the university system. But the fact is that there is a correlation in time between the decline of the university system and the growth of the research system. The research institution system rightly drew from the universities for its talent and for its goal-oriented growth, but it did not have a way of giving back to the university system or nurturing it or seeing the importance. It became a kind of a competition, and slightly worse. Many institution builders took pride not in seeing what is the best in India or best in the world and competing with that, but seeing how many people were worse than you and taking contentment that, oh well, I'm better than these many people. So this narrow view of what success is was also created a problem. Now the net result of this skewed growth has been extraordinary successes in many areas, whether it is space or atomic energy or defense research or in basic sciences or in applied areas in science and technology. There have been many great successes, no question about that. And you heard some of the growth in social sciences, but it was true of other sciences also. So not detracting from that at all. But the situation now is 90% of our research support goes to these major institutions and some central universities, a few of them, not even all of them. And 90% of our students go to the state universities and colleges and elsewhere where there is little research. So there is a slight problem. In terms of creative thinking, logical thinking and a research-oriented thinking, the absence of research in our broad undergraduate system and in our postgraduate system in our state universities and many central universities remains a very big challenge. Purpose-driven skilling of people for jobs is necessary, but it is a moving goalpost. You skill according to what you need today. In 3 years' time, the goalposts have changed, and you skill according to what is needed then. Only by high quality, basic education and critical thinking can you be prepared for the unknown situations in every way. And we are again a very large country and a large country of young people. And therefore it is vital that we bring in research thinking across all areas, social sciences, humanities, science, engineering, medicine, mathematics, in this broader ecosystem. And the question is, how can you do it? So I will take, just a little time suggesting how it can be done. And this is something which the government has taken on, and I think it is happening in multiple ways. So we have to see how, what kind of feedback one can give and how this can be effective. Now let's take a map of India, and you put on that map every lab of this Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. You will find from Kashmir to Kanyakumari these 37 labs. You do that for the Indian Council for Agricultural Research, 65 labs. You do it for the ICMR, 40-ish so labs. You do it for the atomic energy, space, Department of Science and Technology, Department of Defense Research. And then you put on this the central universities which are better supported. You see that the whole country is packed with high quality labs, but they have a standard feature. It is as if there is a salt and pepper mix in the country, where the pepper is these labs of high quality, high resources, high amount of infrastructure and space, and no matter how much water you pour, the pepper will not dissolve with the salt next door. These laboratories need not, in their way they function, be aware of what is happening next door or in a bigger national perspective. They try to do things, but not by integrating with the broader ecosystem, the university system. This many people realize. It's not something strange or new that I'm saying. And the question is, how can we break this in a manner which is effective going forward? Because it's a very competitive world, and all those challenges I told you about climate change and so on need to be met. The answer lies, one, in a very difficult solution, and the other is also difficult but not as difficult. The first point had a big challenge. is that a very substantial part of the budget in our science and technology, in our major institutional structures, goes into salaries and electricity and water. This varies from 60% to over 80%, leaving actual very little amount for research support. Now, if you look at the changing scientific world, it is theoretically impossible to any lab or even a group of labs to solve problems on scale which India needs. But the extraordinary capability of these laboratories means they can be the aggregator of problems nationally and on a planetary scale, and an aggregator of solutions, collaborating with their own laboratories, with academia and with industry. And this is something which is feasible, whether it's in defense or atomic energy or scientific and industrial research, to become a problem articulator and a problem solver. And this is a mindset change. This has actually happened very recently in the major space reforms. The space sector was well funded and decided when it would make launches and what it would launch. And that has changed dramatically now with the creation of a structure called InSpace. InSpace looks at the outside ecosystem and says what is needed for the economy, what our startups need, what does industry need, what are the global launches I can make, reviews all of them and tells ISRO inside, look, this is what is happening, you charge them for this and this much you use your internal resources and do that. So ISRO then becomes a R&D engine which can collaborate with the outside ecosystem and get things done. Now, this is the kind of reform which is absolutely terrific and which is being looked at for other agencies, and we should see how that should happen. So this way we'll connect, we'll grind the pepper a little more and connect it with the salt. The next is stimulating research in our broader ecosystem of our state universities, our major central universities and colleges. Many years ago, I told a friend of mine, late Dr. Bharat Chattu, I was much younger then, I said, look, the trouble with universities is that they don't function well, whereas our research labs function well. That's why there are people gravitate to research lab and not universities. And Bharat told me that I'm wrong. He said there is no shortage of poorly functioning universities, but there's also no shortage of poorly functioning research labs. So don't assume that only research labs function well. That's not the reason. The point is you need a stimulation of research despite the challenges of the broader state and central university ecosystem. When you tell someone, I want to stimulate research in Pune University or Madras University, they say, oh, but there are so many problems, difficult to hire, there are all sorts of problems in hiring, bureaucracy is much worse, there is that. So all of that is true. I mean, if it were simple, anyone could solve it. If it were complex, it requires talented people to get into it and solve it. And therefore, a major national research foundation has been proposed, and that hopefully will, I think, not hopefully, will very surely get taken ahead soon. That addresses a huge injection into the ecosystem of resources across humanities, social sciences, science and technology, medicine, agriculture. And all of these are important because it's as important to understand the history of archaeology in India as it is to understand how to make a laser interferometric gravitational observatory. So these kinds of, ways by which to have a mooring in your society, whether it's in agriculture or history or arts, and also look forward is needed. And the National Research Foundation aims to do that and make all our top research institutions and top laboratories effectively more like a field station for the broader ecosystem, rather than the laboratories being a one-way street taking from the ecosystem. So these two kinds of measures, reforms in our big science areas, reform in our, through our research funding, are likely to be very transformative. Industry also has a big challenge. Today, industry is cash rich, but its risk capital averse, and therefore its investment in research is very poor. For it to invest more in research, it can mitigate this risk by partnering with our institutions. That needs to be facilitated a lot more. The research expenditure of the Googles and the Amazons, for example, are much more than the entire US National Science Foundation every year. So So if you have to be competitive, you have to be innovative. So to end, there is this war of excellence and challenge, and there are many challenging problems. If we attempt to keep on beating against the wall in a routine manner, nothing will happen. But there are ways by which, by innovation, careful thinking, primarily collaboration, national interaction, that one can bore through the walls and be more efficient in what we do, whether it's in agriculture or industry or anything else, and thereby go through another kind of excellence, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vijay. When I asked him to speak on this topic, I was thinking I'm giving him a very difficult task. I was wondering how he'll handle it. But he has done it brilliantly. He has put the Indian experience in the context of universal growth of humanity, and then in the context of the world. And finally, he has even brought it down to the micro problems, micro organizations that India needs, complete micro level how we handle. That's what comes, that's the kind of canvas you can operate upon when you have gone through the experiences, the experience he has gone through. I have a very old relationship with Vijay. I first met him when he went to IIT Kanpur for 1 year, and he was doing his BTech at that time. And it so happens that at various points we have been meeting. After my PhD, I went to TIFR for a few weeks, and he was doing his PhD in the Siddiqui's lab. That was the first molecular biology lab. Am I right?
Yeah.
First molecular biology lab in India that was set up in TIFR by Prof. Siddiqui. And not him, I went and saw his lab, and there used to be one of our colleagues, Satpal Singh. And they used to be so excited about what they are doing. I remember they were working on Drosophila. That was the basic fly from which much of the genetics has been studied. So Satpal Singh was showing how they can make flies which go anti-gravity, the flies which go west and the flies which go east, or the flies which go towards light or go against the light, the flies who have eyes on their legs, the flies that have all these things they were showing me one by one. And it looks like a child's play, but it was serious work, because by doing this, you identify which gene has what function. And since then, he was at the beginning of this molecular biology in India. Since then, molecular biology has reached fairly high in India. And after that, I remember when my daughter wanted to do molecular biology, and we went to NCBS, and he was the director there. And I remember one of the, I asked him that, is it a good choice to keep my daughter here? And his answer was that if she can go to one of the top 5 universities of USA, then she should go there. Anything less than that, let she be here. That is the kind of confidence our science people, the kind of things that have been built in India. In many fields, we have that kind of confidence that we can compete with the best in India. As he told us that pre-independence, some brilliant scientists had that confidence. After independence, that kind of to get back that kind of confidence took several decades, but it came. Only as he pointed out, the science has become much bigger after the Second World War. And in terms of resources, we have not been able to keep pace, or it's not really possible to keep pace. And maybe ways are being found to solve this. NRF, which has been thought of, is one such attempt which is being made. And the other issue of bringing university and the research institutions together, this is a very significant problem in the sciences. In the social sciences, I don't know, because our institutions that we have, ICSSR also has 25 institutions across the world, across the country. But there, you don't see, in most cases, you don't see that kind of separateness between the university and the research institution. Yesterday, I was in some meeting where the VC of South Gujarat University, Surat, he told me that we can make your institute a department of our. So there, in these sciences, they're very near each other. They are in social sciences, they're very near each other. They're not as separated as in the sciences. But this issue of keeping the research and the teaching together and supporting both equally has been that. I remember once I met our Abdul Kalam Sahib, and he was just repeating it again and again. Let us never separate research and teaching. Let us never separate. So I think also that thought of this has come. This is our first lecture on this series that we have started, and it has been a very good beginning. Thank you very much for that. And I hope we will be able to do similarly competent, similarly detailed talks on various other aspects of the Indian experience. Thank you, all of you who have come today here on our invitation. And who is going to do the formal thanks? You?
I left my mask here.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of ICSR, I am privileged to convey our heartfelt thanks to Padma Shri Professor K. VijayRaghavan for such an invigorating and insightful and futuristic lecture. The fast-paced and multifaceted scientific and technological developments and innovations in India have empowered and equipped India to achieve this invincible progress and welfare, not only for its 130 million Indians, but the global community as well. Professor Raghavan's insight and elucidation on the evolution, human ingenuity, challenges in preserving our Mother Earth in face of the need of the accelerated growth, and history and future of challenges of integrating science in India has been extremely enlightening. We also thank our Honorable Chairman, Professor J.K. Bajaj sir, and respected Professor V.K. Malhotra, Member Secretary ICSR, for taking this significant initiative for organizing the ICSR AKAM lecture series on review of achievement of independent India and the prospects for future in various fields on this eve of celebration of the 75th year of Indian independence. It is our privilege that the first lecture in this series has been rendered by a distinguished scientist and illustrious personality of such an eminence as Professor Raghavan. We also thank this distinguished audience, Honorable Sir Professor Murli Manohar Joshi ji, Senior Diplomats of Foreign Embassies in India, Senior Scientists, Social Scientists, and the Directors and Faculty of our ICSR Research Institute for their august presence here. I am also thankful to my colleagues from ICSR for their invaluable participation and always giving unstinted support to all such ICSR's endeavors. My special thanks to Dr. Mesh Madhukar and his team for their relentless efforts for organizing this pertinent and invaluable lecture. Thank you all for gracing us with your benign presence today. We look forward to your valuable presence in another lecture in this series as well on this very important theme of celebrating the 75th year of Indian independence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, madam. Now I request our Vijay sir to facilitate our chief guest.
This is homework. Yes,
Thank you.
And with this, we end our today's program here with a very important shloka. Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kashit dukh bhag bhave. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.